beautiful. Thank you, sir. Well, welcome back to Andertons TV. It's always nice when we get to meet the people behind the wonderful gear that we enjoy and we sell every day in Andertons, and today's no different. So Chris Benson here.
Hey, everybody.
Yeah, he's in the UK and has come to Andertons, and we're just going to chat. So what was it that brought you to the UK? What are you just doing, like a dealer trip to Europe? Or?
Well, we this launched today or yesterday, depending on what country you're in.
Yes.
We did a collab with the Beach Boys where we made them a spring reverb unit and tremolo, and it was made like 66 of them. I think they're all gone, so I shouldn't be showing them anyways. But they had the release and kind of announcement at Abbey Road Studios, Studio
Very
2,
cool.
and that was a big reason that I did this project, because I really wanted to check out Studio 2, and we kind of got the full experience. You know, we pretty much got in there as soon as they let us in, and we were the last ones to leave, and kind of just running amok, playing pianos and checking out Fairchild compressors, and it was super fun.
It's a crazy. I think if you go to Abbey Road and you begin to think about all the albums and musicians that have been in there, it's an overwhelming thing, really, isn't it?
It's completely overwhelming. Yeah. I mean, they haven't really changed the room. You know, you look at old pictures, they still have the same baffles everywhere. It was just an unbelievable experience.
Well, for people watching, I'm sure if you're a fan of higher end pedals and guitar amplifiers, Benson probably won't be a terribly new name for you. I think we first started doing Benson stuff when the preamp came out, and then we've sort of added the amps and some of the other pedals to the range. It's difficult, I think, nowadays to bring a pedal to the market with a drive circuit in it and feel like you've genuinely got some sort of unique flavor to yours. But I think one of the reasons the Benson stuff has been popular is there is some level of uniqueness there. So we'll go into that. But I'm always interested in what the journey was for you to get to being a guy who makes a living now making amps and pedals. So where did you start?
Well, I started with just being a poor musician who couldn't afford a nice amp, and which I was okay with. I was completely okay just playing my my old solid state Ampeg, and I was playing bass in a lot of bands. And at some point, I think in my late 20s, I heard I plugged into a Fender Bassman, just a silver panel, 70s one, in a practice space, and it just kind of hit me like a ton of bricks. It's like, this is a higher quality sound than what you've previously been experiencing. And I was like, wow, this is amazing. This is like a whole new instrument. And I wanted to chase that, and not having much money, just being a poor musician, I guess. I decided to try to make one, because I was a handy guy. And I think I started buying parts and doing a bunch of research, and forums were kind of a new thing around that time. And I was just on forums kind of learning a bunch of misinformation about tube amps, but some good stuff. And I think 3 months later, I had a working Fender 5F6A Bassman thing that I'd stuck together, and that was the first thing that got me into it. And then from there, it was just like a complete addiction, just head over heels. Like, well, why does this sound different than the one that I played the other few months ago? And maybe I should make another one. And it kind of snowballed into kind of this obsession thing. And I talked my way into working as a repair tech, which I did for a number of years, and eventually started thinking, well, I could probably design my own stuff. And I would take ideas from the amps that I was working on. It's like, oh, this Supro sounds interesting. Like, why does it sound the way it does? And I was learning how to use scopes and kind of all the test equipment, and kind of came up with that's when I came up with the Monarch. It was just, I'd work all day in the shop, and then I'd come home and stick, this ratty old chassis together at night and just try out different circuit blocks and see what everything did. And eventually I had something that sounded really good and unique and could do all the things that I wanted personally in an amp. And then someone heard it. It's like, you should start a business doing that. And so they kind of helped me get started. And the rest is just a bunch of stress.
It's interesting. I always think it's, please don't take this the wrong way as well, but I always think there's a certain level of comedy irony in, you're not the first amp designer who started because they couldn't afford to buy the amp they wanted to do, but then because they're a poor musician, but then who ultimately end up making amplifiers that poor musicians can't afford.
I know.
You know, there's a sort of, you know, and that's what I mean. There's always, I guess it is inevitable that if you're chasing premium tone, you either accept you've got to pay a premium price or you build your own, you know, and
Exactly.
that's the reality.
And I encourage people to learn how to build their own. It's an amazing learning experience.
But that's the thing I find most fascinating. And I've spent some time working, you know, with different companies over the years, you know, probably most noticeably Martin Kidd at Victory, about trying to understand what goes into amp designs. And whilst there's clearly a science and a theory about creating a circuit that amplifies a note, there's a massive amount of happy accidents that occur and just things where you go, oh, I put these two things together, and just because they're this layout on the board as opposed to this layout on the board, it just sounds, I've connected them the same way, but because they're in a different position, it sounds different. So that must have been a fascinating journey, just going, you know, learning all the stuff that you can't find out in a textbook, that you can only find out by just stumbling across it.
Well, they didn't learn how, you know, woodwinds worked in a textbook, and it's kind of the same thing. You just kind of, you play with stuff and then you listen to it and then you manipulate it if you want to. It's instrument making, and there's no rule book for that, which is nice.
Do you think, you know, I think we all, no, that's not true. Maybe not all of us. There are many guitar players that you know, are searching for tones that guitarists seem to have back in the 50s and the 60s and the 70s, but seem to be more difficult to achieve now. Do you think something has fundamentally changed as products have become more and more mass produced as opposed to the smaller quantities they were? Or is it, I don't know, is it the accessibility to certain parts that have changed? I mean, what is it? Or is it all in our heads? Do modern amplifiers sound fine, but we've got this obsession with vintage gear that we need to fuel somehow?
I don't quite know, but what I'll say is, like, the way we approach old tubes sound better, or old speakers, you know, you can't get the right Jensens or whatever anymore, is, well, we're working with what we have, and they sound pretty darn good to us. Yeah, it doesn't have RCA black plate tubes in it, but you can't get those. You can't go to, you know, your local Andertons or retailer and buy that kind of thing. So let's try to get it to sound as good as possible with what we do have. And yes, there are certain things that, like, manufacturing for the most part is, people have forgotten a lot about how to make transformers and tubes and capacitors, and everything was tubes and transformers and capacitors. The entire world was. If only a small part of the world is using that kind of thing, then you're going to lose a lot of knowledge. And what we do is we try to work with people who care enough to retain the knowledge. Like, a transformer maker for the amplifiers is a student of transformer design, and he, you know, he'll be the first to tell you, like, there isn't really a textbook for this, especially for audio stuff. So you kind of have to do what I did with amps and take them apart component by component and really try to figure out, like, how it works, why it sounds the way it does.
Your guitar amps, I think, if I'm right in saying, although we first started selling pedals, amps was where you began your sort of journey. You've gone, you know, you like these low wattage, smaller type guitar amplifiers. What is it that draws you to that? And we've got here a Vinny and a Nathan, I think, today, haven't we? Which are a couple of little 1x10 5-watt combos.
Yeah.
That sound huge, by the way.
Oh,
but
thank you.
what is it that you like about this style of guitar amplifier?
Well, it's not louder than it has to be, and modern PA systems are more than capable to, you stick a mic in front of it, and they generally sound great. You don't have to reach the entire audience with your guitar amp anymore. And they sit in, the passenger seat of a car on the way to the gig, which is nice. You don't have to huff it in like you would a 412. So it's just a very practical size. And if you can pack as much tone and harmonics and into a small size, that's where you can really focus. You don't have to think about, well, is this really going to reach, this entire amphitheater of people.
I remember my first ever experience of doing, it was a Fender event, and we'd hired a fairly big venue. I think we had about 300 people in the venue. It was like a school assembly hall type thing. And the Fender demonstrator brought his bassman with him, and without even going anywhere near the PA, the thing couldn't go above 2 on the volume. And you're just going, what gigs nowadays do I need an amp this loud for?
It's mystifying to me. I mean, you see all the bands from the 60s and 70s with their giant rigs, and then the drummer is back there completely unmiked. And it's like, if you're actually driving that thing into distortion, I don't know how this works physically. Like, how did it sound?
A lot of great is how it sounded most of the time.
But, well, that's true. But then you can't hear the drums.
All right. Well, look. We are, as we go through this video, we're going to talk about design philosophies and things like that. But we're also going to hear some stuff. You'll be glad to hear. I'd like to kind of hear these. I've got the 2 amps. That intro bit that you heard, actually, we had both amplifiers switched on. But let's just hear them differently, and perhaps you can just explain a little bit. In terms of they're both the same size guitar amplifier with the same kind of volume, tone, reverb. Actually, no, this one has power on it, doesn't it? So it's a slightly different set of knobs on it.
Yeah.
But perhaps we can just have a little listen. We've got reverb in there. So the pink cable is into the Nathan. So that's what we're on first. Can we just, into the Vinny.
Vinny, yeah.
Let's just have a little listen to this, and I can set the knobs however you want them. And perhaps you can just explain sort of what's in a Vinny and what kind of guitar player is likely to enjoy this.
Yeah, so the Vinny, the big difference between these 2 amps, because they share pretty similar preamp, is the power tube. The Vinny has a pentode EL84, like a Vox style thing, so it's going to sound a little bit more British, as they say, and it's going to be a little bit more mid-range focused. And since it's kind of made to break up, we gave it power scaling as well, so you can kind of get it to break up at lower levels. So
we've got the power scaling. Pretty much everything here is 12 o'clock, volumes maybe about 10 o'clock, and the reverb is about 10 o'clock. So let me turn your tuner off.
Okay, so it'll do clean tones. So it's kind of chimey sounding. But then it gets really fun if you
so you're going to go
turn
the other
the volume
way,
up, and I'm going to turn this down.
And is power scaling just a master volume, or is it a different type of circuit?
So this actually does a unique thing. We use a vacuum tube as a voltage regulator to the power amp of the amp. So it's actually got 2 power tubes. But the one of them is just sort of sagging the voltage to the other one. And so it sort of does the same thing as a master volume, but it's literally just taking the wattage of the power amp down.
Right.
Which
so you're still feeling like you're driving that power valve as much as you would be loud, but you're able to just manipulate the actual volume down.
Exactly. Yeah. And I like power tube distortion for the most part. That's what got me into this thing. And so I don't really put master volumes on my amps, but I do the power scaling, which I think like the sound of.
What's quite apparent here is I think it's relatively easy if you've not had the opportunity to talk to you about the amp, to just go, well, clearly this is just a little amplifier that you know, has been built to service someone that just wants to play at home and something like that. But actually, I think, you know, clearly that's not. This is designed to be a portable gigging amplifier, right?
Oh yeah.
So yeah, okay, interesting. Okay, go on, let's get it. So this is now, yeah, we've now got the preamp volume at like 3/4, and we've backed the power down a little bit. So
yep, and I'm gonna switch to the bridge pickup because it's gonna rock.
That is a vintage sounding amp, isn't it? It sounds like an old cranked amp. How you imagine an old cranked amp when you hear records from back then of old cranked amplifiers. It's kind of what it sounds like.
That was all power tube stuff. So.
Really? That's all just power tube distortion? Mm-hmm. That sounds great.
Well,
that does sound cool.
Yeah, so we describe it as like a greasy kind of sound, kind of classic rocky. When I was designing it, what my shop manager at the time said that sound, I don't know what you did, but that just sounds like Neil Young tone.
I can hear that very raspy, angry sounding guitar amplifier.
Yeah.
So what is the difference then between that and a Nathan then?
So the Nathan is kind of, so this has a 6V6 and doesn't have the power scaling. I wanted this one to have kind of a fatter bottom.
So you're going what, like a Princeton-y sort of vibe, or still?
Yeah, people kind of describe it as our version of a Princeton, even though the circuit's nothing like it. Because this is a single-ended 5-watt Princeton's. Yeah, it's just completely different, but it performs the same function. It's actually about the same volume as a Princeton, has reverb, and this has become a very popular amp for like LA session guys. So, and it's just kind of like, if you want a pedal platform kind of thing, it's the thing, because it has all the frequencies. It doesn't have like any sort of mid-range hump or dips or anything. It'll just kind of take what you throw at it, and then it just sounds good by itself too. So, and I usually run the treble down a little bit and bass up. So here's a Nathan Jr.
Got tons of bass end. I mean, I was a bit, when I saw we'd set these up and put them on tables, I'm always a bit like, oh, we're going to lose a bit of the bass and stuff like that. But it doesn't feel like, I know they're 10-inch speakers, but what's the brand of speaker that's in them?
So it has a Celestion Greenback, which is one of my favorite speakers. I prefer darker speakers and then brighter amps into those. And because it kind of balances themselves out, each other out. Most of that bass response is actually coming from the cabinet design. The back is mostly closed.
Right.
And that kind of lends itself to a fuller bass. So a lot of things working in tandem to get that sound.
I'm sure I remember somewhere that the Nathan name is an artist, right?
Yeah.
Is that a friend of yours? Or
a friend of mine, he's played with he was like a Portland session guy, but kind of like an indie rock session guy. Like he played with the Dandy Warhols and M. Ward and all these great Portland artists. And he worked at the same guitar shop that I did, and we became good friends. And he wanted me to make him an amp, and it's like, let's just call it the Nathan Jr. because it's sort of like a play on Pro Junior or that kind of thing. And also like, outside of that world, no one knows who he is. So it was just funny to me.
And is Vinny a person as well? Or is this like, where did that name come from?
Yeah, so Vinny, Blake, I don't know if you know the Tone Mob podcast.
Yes.
It's a Portland-based podcast. And Blake Weiland from that podcast, before he was a podcaster or even really knew about the internet, used to bring all of his amps to me to fix. And I kind of, so I made him a Monarch and posted a picture of it, and he had me make it in this like covering that was really interesting, and a lot of people liked it. It kind of went viral-ish. I showed him the thing, and he was like, Instagram, huh? And that kind of got him started down the road of being like a gear professional, however he is, like podcast, business owner, great guy. He lives in the same kind of area as I do. And he wanted me to make an amp to commemorate the birth of his son, Vincent.
Right.
And he thought I was just going to make him, some 1 watt little piece of trash. Like, it kind of makes a sound, but it's more of just kind of an artifact. And that's not how I roll. I really cared about the sound of it, and I spent months designing this thing, and eventually came out with our 1 watt amplifier, the Vinny, which we just continued because we did this one, which goes 1/4 watt to 5 watts and has a lot more features and stuff. So Vinny is a real person, and so is the Vincent.
Is Vinny old enough to play the guitar yet?
Yeah.
Does he play yet?
I think so.
That's all right.
Yeah, it's kind of funny because
no pressure, Vinny, but you need to learn to play the guitar.
Every time I see him, he's like, Chris Benson. It's like it must be weird to be growing up knowing there's like a popular amplifier named after you.
Yeah, that's cool though. That is cool. Kid. All right, well, look, we're going to play through these amplifiers while we look at the pedals and stuff. But obviously, these will be more information on these on our website if you want to find out more. And there's a couple of other amps, right, that you make in your range as well. So.
Oh, yeah, much bigger. Yeah.
So let's move on to, I guess, where most people, I guess, will be familiar with your stuff. If I take the guitar cable and then you can kind of do the knobs on the pedals to show what the different ones are, and I'll just have a bit of a strum. But
sure,
we can go through really in whatever order you want to go through. We can do chronologically or in terms of whatever makes most sense.
We can do chronological.
Okay,
I like that.
Let's do that then. So what was the first one then? So
the first one was the Preamp Pedal, and I think that came out in like 2016. And basically Robert Keeley, he came to visit my shop, and I'd showed him some pedals that I'd made, and he's like, "Oh, we should make a pedal for you guys." It's like, "Yeah, sounds great." So I took some time, and I took the preamplifier that we put in the amps into a JFET circuit. So I just replaced the tubes with JFET transistors, and shot them off the schematic, and like, oh, this sounds pretty good. I didn't think we were going to ever make more than, I was nervous ordering 50 from him.
So this was done as a collaboration with Keeley first, was it?
Yeah, it was his idea.
Right,
and
okay.
he wanted to manufacture them, and it's like, you guys should have pedals. Like, I guess. And so it's the preamp of my amp, and obviously we sold a lot more than 50 at this point. But it's just an amp in the box pedal, an overdrive. People say it's not a preamp, but it's the preamp of my amp.
Right.
And you can put it in front of a power amp, so I don't know it's not a preamp about it.
But we're not doing that, right? I mean, we're going into another preamp, but it's fine like that. But you could do it straight into like an effects return or something like that if you wanted less coloration from the preamp of your amp.
Exactly.
So.
I mean, you might have to use a buffer in between them depending on the power amp, but yeah, you can totally run it like that.
So this is a. It's raspy, and funnily enough, it does capture the sound that you had when you were playing the Vinny driven. Which traditional overdrive pedals, especially tube screamery type overdrive pedals, are much smoother than this, aren't they? So if you want that more. Yeah, well, it's again not going to use better or worse to describe it. Just it is a more ampy sounding overdrive.
Yeah, and that's what I'm into, amps, and it's hard to go from blasting a bunch of vintage amps every day to clicking on a tube screamer and saying.
So let me just take that off. So we're kind of like edge of breakup. Ah, it's great. And it'll still do, it responds like the and that's not even on, we got plenty more if we want. Actually, now it begins to smooth out a little bit more like a drive pedal. This is, by the way, a Heritage Custom Shop H150 in a beautiful green colour. And I can't remember what pickups are in these. Do they use their own, Mr. Pete, or are these Seymour Duncans?
I think they're Seymour Duncans.
We think they're Seymour Duncans, but the website will tell you. But yeah, it's just fat. That's from... Oh yeah, it's fat. I mean, it's super fat. It's unhealthily fat. I'm fairly, yeah, it's literally, I'm fairly sure you can take injections or stomach bands or something to cure this.
Ozempic.
Yeah, whatever that new injection is. That's great. I mean, and no wonder Robert Keeley thought you should make this.
They are their own pickups.
Okay, we take that back. They're not Seymour Duncan, they wind them themselves. Okay, so the Preamp started the whole line of pedals. What came next?
The next one came in 2020 when everything shut down.
That was a big old gap then, 3 or 4 years of
Oh yeah, I mean, we were just cranking amps out. But pandemic hit and it was hard to make stuff. And I didn't think we'd be able to be in the same room again for a long time. And so I wanted to design a pedal that, people could maybe make at their house.
Yeah.
And that's the Germanium Fuzz here, which uses a technology called thermal bias.
Yes. Isn't there one of these that we have to wait for Isn't there one of these we have to wait for the light to change a certain color or something before it's sort of at correct running temperature?
I mean, the first, when you first power it on, yeah, but after that, it's not like the light comes back on and you have to stop playing. It's sort of like a house thermostat. So it heats up the transistor and then gets to a certain point. It shuts off, furnace in your house shuts off, and then it gets down a little bit and turns back on.
When I very, very first, was playing guitar, and there were all these beautiful urban myths going around about Eric Johnson and the craziness that the weird myths that would go around about how he would get his tone. And one of them was about this idea of he used to take the backs off of his fuzz face pedals or whatever because he was convinced that obviously, if you could reduce the temperature of the germanium transistor or whatever, it affected the tone. And of course, I don't even know if this was pre-internet or just on the verge of because of course everybody was like, oh, he can't possibly. But I think we all accept now that that's real, right?
Oh, it's completely real. Oh my gosh.
So yeah, we take it all back. Eric was right all along. What happens then to that component when it gets hotter or colder?
So what happens is it loses what they call bias, which is essentially you have...
As it gets hotter, it loses bias, or the other way?
It depends on how you set it up. It's
okay.
Basically, they leak more when they leak current through them, which is not supposed to happen in transistors, which is why germanium is obsolete. And if they leak more, if they get hotter, they start leaking, that changes the kind of operating point. And so instead of like, if you have like I'm going to try to do a visual thing here. You got 0 volts here and 9 volts here, or if you're Eric Johnson, maybe 7.5 volts or whatever it is.
8 2/3.
The magic voltage.
Yeah.
So your guitar signal, everyone knows what a sine wave or a waveform looks like. Well, if it starts here, it can go up and it can go down, up and down. Once it gets all the way up, it'll clip, like it can't go any further, so it squares off the waveform. Same thing on the bottom. It gets to a certain point, squares it off. Now,
that's what we perceive as distortion, right?
The squared off thing. So, if the bias is literally where, if you're not playing, this is sitting in between those two voltages. And if it's in the middle, you're going to have, it goes up, squares off, down, squares off, and you're going to have, it's going to look symmetrical. The top of the waveform is going to look like the bottom of the waveform. And that kind of distortion, that leads to like odd order, third harmonic distortion. It sounds a little chewier, sounds a little intermodulation-y, and it's a completely different sound than if the bias is up a little bit or down, because that makes an asymmetrical waveform, and that sounds completely different. So
it's the first time anyone has actually properly explained the difference between symmetrical and asymmetrical clipping there. That might make an interesting 60-second Instagram clip, but okay.
So the problem is, like, if the bias is drifting with heat, you're going to get a completely different character out of the germanium transistor.
But not necessarily in a desirable versus undesirable way, right? You're just going, because pedal manufacturers have, developed 1,000 pedals off the basis of how do I want the pedal to clip, to give a sound that the artist wants.
Yep.
So you're just chasing something, but not necessarily. You're chasing almost an imperfection, aren't you? Or if you can even describe it as that.
All distortion is an imperfection.
Really, you want some. You don't necessarily want it.
Well, this will pin, and you could just decide. This will center bias that transistor that's doing a lot of the clipping in it.
Using the thermostat, it'll try to center bias that, will it?
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
This is another one that uses the same technology. This is a very asymmetrical waveform because the bias is different, and that's where it sounds, good to me, and it sounds good to a lot of builders. Everyone kind of knows, you bias this at 1 volt or 7 volts, depending on how you're looking at it, or this, these should be more or less center bias. So there's like kind of conventions, because you could sit there and change the bias and be like, oh, that sounds good, and that's where the ear's drawn.
And again, I bloody love the guitar market. It's every other industry that there is trying to achieve more consistency from out of a run of products. But of course, we love that, and I guess that's why silicon replaced germanium, right? Is that it would perform more consistently across, from one component to the next or under different conditions. But of course, we love tubes and germanium components that are all a bit, slightly random in how they're going to, within no two are ever necessarily identically the same. It's just, but what other industry wants that? No wonder they're so hard to find anymore.
Yeah.
But let me hear this germanium fuzz then. So,
all right,
let's turn this.
All right, fuzz time.
I mean, again, fuzz is. I have a real. There's lots of distortion pedals that I can own, or overdrive pedals, and I feel the same about it pretty much every time I plug it in. Fuzz pedals, I have to be in the right mood, and I have to have the right guitar and the right amplifier, because they're much more unpredictable, I think, which is their sort of charm, isn't it? That's quite a smooth fuzz, though, isn't it?
Oh, yeah.
again, you love all that feedback. And then you can hear where that, I guess that's where that you get that slightly spitty, gated type effect as the as you start to let the note decay naturally. And why is the impedance? What is that actually doing on there? That impedance control.
So Jimi Hendrix was my favorite growing up, like a lot of people.
Join the club. Yes.
And so this is essentially a fuzz face type
Right.
circuit. You know, 2 transistor fuzz. Jimi Hendrix used a 2 transistor fuzz, but what he did a lot of the time was he would turn the volume down on a Stratocaster, and so a lot of the clean sounds on Fender or on Hendrix records are actually a rolled off guitar going into a fuzz face, and it has its own wildly amazing sound to it. So one of the issues with the fuzz face is it cares a lot about what pedals come before it, like if there's a buffer before it or whatever. So I tried to solve the problem by putting I just stuck a buffer in the front of this pedal, and then I put a pickup simulator circuit after the buffer, so the fuzz section thinks it's seeing a guitar.
Right.
Instead of,
whatever the pedal is
a
that's
buffer.
before it, or a buffer, yeah.
And that allows you to use this pedal, you could use it after any of these pedals, and it's going to sound completely the same.
Clever. Because normally the way people with pedal boards would solve that is you're either forced to always have the fuzz first, or you have these interesting little sort of effects loop devices where when you kick that in, it's kind of like it puts the fuzz on but with nothing else, and then takes the fuzz completely out the circuit. Or, but I didn't even, we've been selling this for years and I didn't even realize that's what you'd done. So that's clever.
So, but you lose the rolled off sound if you do it that way, because so this simulates the guitar volume after the pickup simulator circuit. So you can clean it up a little bit by turning this on, and they get brighter. Like fuzz faces are unique.
So the more impedance you do, the more it's going to simulate me rolling the volume of my guitar down, you mean?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Now that's, again, I've heard the story hundreds of times about the sort of the get the fuzz face sound and then roll the volume down, but I'm not naturally that guy. Maybe a bit more now, but certainly, for many, many years I was just a volume on 10 all the time. So this probably would have been ideal for me for that sort of... And I see I've always enjoyed that. I think it took me a long time to even really know what I was hearing, but I remember seeing, we worked with an amazing guitar player called Rabir Massad, who perhaps plays you wouldn't necessarily listen to him and say he's sort of Hendrix inspired, but he had this incredible clean sound by using a really overdriven amplifier and then having the volume on his guitar down at like 1 or 2. And it would be very clean, but with this really interesting sort of harmonic distortion there, but not like in the way we would sort of traditionally refer to distortion. And I guess that's ultimately, perhaps that's what Jimi Hendrix was just doing 50 years before. But
yeah. The magic thing about fuzz faces is they get darker as you overdrive them, which goes in the face of almost every other device that overdrives. This is one of 2 pedals I use live, and instead of turning it off, it's always on. I just turn my guitar volume down. It gets cleaner, brighter, all the things you want out of a clean tone, and then you roll it up into fuzz territory.
That's great. That's cool.
It's fun.
All right. Well, look, I'm slightly conscious that we could be here all day if we spend this long on each pedal. But what's the next one then chronologically that came along?
Oh, let's see. That's this, which is just a Germanium gain stage.
So without, so what you mean? It's this, but without the impedance sort of section in it.
Not to get too complicated, but it's just like it's just a germanium boost, but it uses a different type of bias called servo bias, which sort of does the same thing as the temperature thing without temperature.
Let's hear that. Come on. I've got a funny feeling that when I hear the words boost pedal, I think that all the distortion I'm hearing is coming from just driving the amp harder. But is that not necessarily what's happening in here?
You know, this doesn't really clip that much.
Okay.
It does this interesting thing. People aren't used to hearing just a germanium transistor that has a flat frequency response. But germanium, it's not just the clipping that's affecting the sound. It's just the sound of the element, and it has a very unique sound. So I'll actually turn this under unity gain.
Okay.
Like straight up and down is kind of unity volume,
Right,
but
okay.
you can kind of hear that it kind of is pretty clean, but it adds a little bit of compression in a weird way.
It's that level of compression I can feel. These you might not hear, but
Yeah,
I can feel it. So it's a weird. It's almost like, yeah, if you've got your amp roaring and you almost want a slightly cleaner, more compressed sound, it's like a reverse boost, isn't it?
Yeah, it's because, like, you know, anytime you boost the volume into something, it's generally going to get a little more compressed. This way you can actually go from a slightly more compressed kind of warm sound to something that has a little bit more punch when you actually hit the amp with full signal.
And so if that was, say, 3/4 up, where does that sort of take the amp or take the sounds? Like, pair of these. I know it wouldn't be a cheap gigging rig; it'd be quite an expensive gigging rig, but you could still have a sports car, sit these two on the front seat,
right.
you know. There you go. That's the Porsche 911, couple of Benson 5-watt amplifiers, super expensive pedal board. You could be that guy.
Hey, if you got a Porsche,
everyone hates on the internet. Yes, I want to be that guy. Right. So what comes next then? Now that was relatively recent, wasn't it? Is it Zonk next?
yes, the Stonk Box, which is a Zonk machine or Mark I tone bender or Maestro thing.
I've got a Maestro here somewhere. Yeah, where is it? Oh yeah, up here. Look, this was an expensive purchase of mine just to see what it was like. I think this is like a 1965, 66, something like that. But it was very expensive and not the greatest sounding fuzz I've ever had. You just have to turn it all up and just lean into it.
Yep.
But I must admit, I've never tried an original Zonk box, but the clones that I've tried of it are probably my favourite of all those kind of fuzz pedals.
You might like this one then.
Excellent.
So the Stonk Box, same technology as this that uses the heat and everything. And then these two are the original controls, the filter and the volume, and then I added a tone control and this trim because this doesn't do a terribly good job cleaning up the tone if you want less than fuzz. So.
Oz has just killed himself in the corner. I've just destroyed his favourite band of all time. I think I prefer how you've backed it down a bit there.
Yeah.
It's just a great sounding pedal, isn't it? I still can't get over how big these sound. I don't think I've ever actually really wound one of these up in a demo before. I think I've misunderstood. I've always thought this was like a home use.
Oh no.
It's great. I know, in fairness, I know we got two of them. Let me just hear one. Just. Yeah, you need two. That's what you need. That's massive sounding, isn't it? Right. What was in the Zonk, or that made it different then to? Because you're saying it was more based on a Tone Bender.
Yeah. So.
One.
Yeah, Tone Bender Mark 1. But the Zonk machine, the first Zonk machine, was basically Tone Bender Mark 1 but they took a lot of the bass out. I think maybe they were trying to fix like a gating problem or something. But so I squeezed some of the bass out of this. So it's kind of in between a Mark 1 and a Zonk machine. But then I also gave it a tone control so you can, it gets super, super bright, super, super dark. Just because that seemed like the most useful way to set up this type of pedal. And I didn't think people were going to be that into the gating thing.
Right.
Although it does gate out.
It will do the gate, because
Not completely. It kind of acts more like an expander, but if you turn the filter all the way down.
Because that gated fuzz, again, that's a whole other character in itself, isn't it? And you hear, I do quite like. It's not anything like as spitty as other fuzzes I've tried.
No.
If you really want that much more broken sound, which I think can be fun sometimes. Maybe not that pedal, but
so we actually have a new version of this coming out at some point. It's a collab with David Torn. He's one of my favorite guitar players, and all he uses is Mark 1s. Well, not all he uses, but he's an authority on them, and we're actually going to do a version that does that gating thing a lot more aggressively, because he utilizes that in a lot more of his music. So.
Cool. Right, come on, move on then. So is this basically just that, but with a germanium transistor as opposed to what's in there? Did you say a JFET or something?
JFET, yeah. So this has 3 JFETs. This has 1 germanium transistor and 2 JFETs. Right. And so we just took this circuit and put it in the front of this and made this. And that's it sounds different.
Could we switch? Yeah, we dial these the same and just maybe switch between them, because it's always interesting. People, you those are your 3 predominant transistors, aren't they? To either go germanium, silicon, or JFET. I think I'm showing my.
JFET's technically a kind of silicon, but it sounds different than a BJT, which is a different type of silicon.
And they're kind of interchangeable within a circuit, are they? And they just change the tonality of the pedal.
Yeah, the germanium silicon are more interchangeable. JFETs, you kind of set them up in a different way, but it's kind of nice because JFETs you set up a lot more like a tube. Right. So tube amp guys understand them better, which is probably why I started with them.
Right. Fair enough.
So to get the same thing, this drive is going to be up a little bit because this stage has a little less gain than the JFET stage we use in this.
Okay. Well, let's compare. Just turn the Stonk Box off. That's it. it's chewy is the right word. It feels a bit more chewier, whether that's more compressed, less open and raw. I think I really like, I'm going to revisit the original preamp bass. This is it. They're both good. It's just two different flavors of very similar ice cream.
Yeah,
good ice cream.
The way I describe it is, so this seems to have a little bit more of a brighter attack to the distortion. So if you're using like a darker, spongier type amp,
right,
I would choose this one.
Yeah.
But if I was using a bright, kind of more pedal platformy type amp, I would probably choose this one because it has a little bit more kind of mojo or whatever.
I mean, it's a great shout. I'm using a relatively dark guitar anyway, aren't I? So perhaps if I was using the telly, this might end up being the one to go with.
Yeah, but they definitely do sound different, which is interesting because you're really only changing one thing.
Let me try it with the telly. I'm interested to just sort of see whether that changes my sort of perception of which one I really like. I really like that. Maybe it's the combination with the amps and everything. It's just really working. And again, it's all personal anyway, isn't it? Man alive, who spec'd this guitar? It's got half a baseball bat for a neck.
I love it.
That is a big, chunky guitar, isn't it? I like it too. So we've covered lots of different flavors of fuzz and overdrive and stuff, which is fun. I imagine, again, if you dive on over to the Benson site, and I'm sure actually on the Andertons site over the years, we'll have probably done more in-depth videos of each of these. But let's move on to a couple of pedals that don't do overdrive. Why? I mean, I can understand your obsession with amps and stuff. Naturally, you would do overdrive circuits. What did you? What are you trying to bring to, again, another, there's a lot of delay pedals out there. Not so many of these, in fairness. But what were you trying to achieve that you felt was your sort of angle on the delay pedal?
Yeah, so a big part of what I've done with kind of being an amp tech is people will bring you tape echoes.
Right.
And I really enjoy working on tape echoes, echoplexes, space echoes, stuff like that. Obsession with Bucket Brigade delays, which I've worked on for years as well. But I'm really picky about delay. And so I decided to make my own delay pedal, which was perfect for my needs and what I was kind of looking for. And so it took 4 or 5 years to actually design that thing. And I went through so many different iterations, total labor of love. I definitely, if I'm getting paid by the hour on it, I probably made about $1 an hour. And so it started as an analog delay, and I moved into using a PT2399 chip, which is kind of the super primitive digital chip, but you can set it up with an analog circuit and kind of get that sound. And I just really like this thing, and I think this is probably my perfect delay pedal.
And what is your, I mean, if you could only ever have one delay pedal, your Desert Island delay pedal, would it be a tape echo? Would you get
my Desert Island delay pedal would be an Ibanez 8900.
Oh wow! Just like the original old analog delay pedal
with twice the delay time and modulation added.
I was just about to say those old. I think I have played an Ibanez one, but it's the old Boss one that I've probably played more. And it's just you can't get past a sort of 200 or 300 millisecond delay, which is just, it's fine if you want like a slapback or a much shorter delay, but it was never long enough for what I wanted to try and do. But so you think you kind of achieved that vibe, but there is something about analog delays. I mean, I know, listen to that. That's what we all love, isn't it? Right, those very last decay, you know, where it just sounds like a mushy, but in a nice...
I'm going to ask you to play one chord.
You want me to just play one chord, yeah?
Yep.
Right on the edge, isn't it? Yeah. It's just going to overwhelm, isn't it? But no, it's you have to. I mean, I think if you the MXR do a great pedal carbon copy if you're shopping at the sort of the more entry level that does a similar. It's got that lovely spongy kind of vibe. But I guess you're just taking this to another level. You've got a bit more control over the LFO and the second switch as well. But that is a nice set.
That'll lengthen the feedback time.
I did notice when I was messing around with this before that the mix is, yeah, you've got a real ability, if you want to take the actual repeats quite a lot louder than the dry note, which is sort of unusual, I think, in pedals. Was that just something that does that enable you to do some of those more interesting feedback effects?
Well, the reason I did that was for audio production, because mixing records, I do a lot of that kind of thing. And so if you can actually send a vocal from your computer or mixing board to this and only get the wet signal,
right? Then
you can use it in a lot more kind of creative applications. So I did that selfishly.
Yeah, no. Yeah, so it's less of a guitar, or certainly less of a pedal board type setting, that one, isn't it? I don't know if we ever did actually feature the Benson delay, although Pete will point out to me that I have slightly starting to forget what pedals we've actually covered now.
Yep, certainly has, and no, we didn't.
So this has multiple LFOs too, so it has a hidden menu.
Right.
So if you hold this down, then press that, you can toggle, so that's a sine wave, this will do square wave, and then this will do random.
Oh, wow.
And so to get out of there, you can kind of, yeah.
So let's try. Can we toggle through those other sine waves then?
Oh sure, I just selected random.
Oh, this is random now. Yeah, this is where it gets into sort of. I don't think I play. Everything I play is too sort of straight, really. I think I need to be learn some shoegazery kind of stuff.
I think
it's still fun though.
I think of it more as like a broken Echoplex,
right, where the motor's like
there's a lot of wow and flutter and
I get that. I mean, and that whole slightly, not necessarily broken, but that sort of slightly worn out Echoplex is a sound, isn't it? That's sort of super desirable. But okay, now we're going to get onto the one that. Who knows what this is supposed to be for or where we're going. This pedal isn't even out yet.
Yep.
You've called it a dynamic modulator. I think we all know what modulation is, but I don't know that I've ever necessarily heard it. What is this? This is obviously a collaboration, is it, between you and non-human audio?
Yes. So they made a pedal called the Slow Loris that was essentially a modulated slapback.
Right.
Do you mind if I take over?
No. You take. I'm more than happy for you to demo this one.
Okay. So it is a weird pedal. I'm not going to say it's a new effect, but Dan and Mick seem to think so. I don't know.
It's probably worth just explaining before we get on how a chorus works.
Sure.
And I find this easier to understand if you explain this as a chorus without something rather than try to explain what it is in isolation.
Yeah. So a chorus is essentially a modulated delay pedal. You can get a chorus sound out of this. So it's the dry signal, and you mix the dry signal with a delayed signal, but the delayed signal is going up and down in pitch because the time is changing. Mm-hmm. And the way it goes up and down is in pitch is like that's following an LFO, which is a low frequency oscillator. And it's usually kind of sinusoidal, so it goes. This is a chorus pedal without an LFO. And instead of getting changed by an LFO, it's getting changed by your pick attack. It's detecting it like a compressor would. And then that detector is, changing the pitch of it. So that's what makes it dynamic.
So you're going to hear, when you start to play this, you're going to hear every note with an immediate element of oscillation on it or pitch shift on it. But then whereas on a chorus pedal you would hear that continuing on, you're not on this. You're just going to hear. So it's when I was messing around, I've sort of arpeggiated chords really accentuated what the pedal did, whereas single strummed chords like that sort of just had that initial thing, and then like, I don't know what it's doing now. But look, let's hear it. This is. Can you manipulate that initial sort of pitch so you make it either more subtle or more crazy?
Yeah, so it has two different delay lines and they have two different detectors. So I'm going to turn one of them off for now, so we're only hearing this one. So this has an intensity knob. And so I'm just going to play a couple chords here.
So that's still, the harder you're picking, the more you're accentuating that, I don't know, what is it? Is it portamento? Is that what they call that sort of, that sense of that sliding into a note?
Yeah.
So if I turn the intensity down, is it that it reduces the amount of pitch change, or does it reduce how the sort of how much the attack affects it?
It will reduce the amount of pitch change,
right.
and I guess it's the same thing.
Well, now we kind of get the idea of what it does. So why have a second one in here as well?
If you have a different detector, these two are crisscrossing in time. And if you're crisscrossing through zero, you get a flanging effect.
Right, so that's where the modulation is coming from on the sustained note.
You hear how there's like a high frequency element coming in?
Yep. Yeah, I mean, all this, I guess the sort of the exciting part, but also the complicated part with this is the exciting bit is you're waiting to hear for the first hit record to come out that uses that. The weird bit right now is there isn't one. So like, what am I trying to emulate? But tell me what this ghost button does as well.
Well, I made it in the same enclosure as this, and I needed a secondary, So I decided to take the delay lines and introduce feedback to them, right on the verge of feedback to kind of get like a modulated reverb effect. And you can really kind of hear it doing the flanging thing because they're crisscrossing through zero constantly. This one's weird.
Was it before the ghost thing was on? Was it doing that pitch drop every time you finished, or is that adding that in as well?
It was, but it's kind of hard to hear. So that's the second line,
Right.
and I'll take the first line out for a second. The second line's crazier.
I'm not, you know what? I know exactly, there will be hundreds of guitar players who will be literally going, okay, I need this because that's where the inspiration for my next riff's going to come from. And there'll equally be hundreds, possibly maybe thousands of guitar players going, I don't understand it. It's like not my thing.
Yeah.
But with the ghost thing on, what you were playing there, I found quite, I could see where the inspiration as a player would be, okay, some riff or chord sequence or whatever is going to come out now, and that effect is going to give it, a bit like The Edge does, where, like he plays something, applies the effects that he applies to it.
Do you want to try it now?
Yeah, I think I sort of do. I mean, again, I'm always fascinated. I mean, I think again, that's
so cool.
I don't know. Now I've got it in my head now to play U2 stuff, which I shouldn't. But it's even got a bit of a Beatlesy. You talk about going to Abbey Road at the beginning. Some of those heavily modulated.
Yeah, the flanging thing.
Flanging that you can kind of. It's all gone a bit Sergeant Peppery, hasn't it? I mean, and then again, I suppose that people are going to introduce this with other effects and delay,
Riff, it loves dirt.
So what have I got on now? This and Drive. Like that as well. pause here. He's just like, that's it. This is 100% going on his Amazon wish list. That's great.
I should probably make more of them than we were planning on it.
Well, you know what? We'll see, right? Sometimes you just need that crazy happy accident to happen, and you know, I'm sure all the first Fuzz guys were probably going, oh, I'll probably only sell 50 of these. It just sounds like a broken amplifier, you know, like 50, 60 years later and millions of Fuzz pedals sold. So you never know, man. Well, look, I have thoroughly enjoyed spending an hour or so with you talking about, you know, I think I've learnt a lot. We've all learnt a lot, right? I've certainly, you know, been very interesting to talk about the difference in components and clipping types and all that kind of stuff. And I hope for people that aren't familiar with Benson amps and pedals that they'll take a deeper look now and maybe consider grabbing one of these next time they need something. But look, thanks so much for coming in.
Thank you so much for having me.
No,
this
not
is really
at all.
fun.
It's been an absolute pleasure. I'm glad you've enjoyed your time in England. And thank you guys for watching. Links will be below to all this stuff, or come into the store and try some out yourself. But yes, thank you very much. Thank you, and we'll see you next time. Goodbye.